it's just Martine, and welcome to 2024. Let's read some books to help us grow. New year, same me, but the me can always be improving. That's the mindset we have here, a growth mindset. So I thought it would be fun near the beginning of this year to read some self-improvement books, just to start off the year right. The problem is that Squash That series is this huge readathon that's happening right now, January through part of February. And so I couldn't immediately start reading books for this video. And I actually think that's a good thing, because listen up, I know you've heard it said lots of times, but there's no reason the new year is special. And in fact, we almost never set better goals that we are more likely to achieve at the start of the new year. It's fine that this is not first, because self-improvement and growth should be a constant thing, not a January 1st thing. So I'm going to get reading for this. We're going to read some that have been recommended by other people, some that I just randomly saw through my library, caught my attention, some that I've been wanting to read. Let's grow. Hello. I finally finished the first book for this, which is Get the F Out of Your Own Way by MJ Harris, and I'm giving it 4 stars. There were times when I felt like I wasn't connecting with this book maybe, or that it wasn't written for me, and that's fine. But then I realized how many quotes I highlighted, and it was just so many, and there were some moments that were directly written for me. So overall, I just really enjoyed this book, and I feel like I learned a lot. And even if I didn't learn a lot, one of the things that I've noticed with self-help is you can know something and not apply it and forget it then and need reminding over and over and over again about these truths. And I think this book did a really great job of doing that in a very approachable way. So for people who maybe aren't really comfortable reading this type of book all the time, I think MJ makes it really approachable. And I think that's one of the reasons he's so popular on YouTube and stuff. I've never watched him before, but I can tell from the way that he wrote this book that he's very authentic and kind in the way that he gives advice, but also no nonsense. You need to hear this. And that was really helpful for me, because sometimes you do just need to hear hard truths. I think some of the chapters that were most worth my while were the chapters that discussed things like self-esteem and all that, because I think it's pretty common that people need to work on their self-esteem, but I definitely feel like it's helped identify for me that that's a big thing that I need to be working on, because that will bleed over into a lot of other problems that I might be facing in my life. So it's good to have a tool to help you identify that. And it also, reading this book helped in some of my interactions in day-to-day life, because I took some of the ideas out of it. One of the ideas is to give people your guidebook. People cannot know what you need from them if you don't tell them. I kind of already knew that for the concept of love languages and stuff, but I think this put this a lot more broadly than the idea of love languages did. So I even had a conversation with one of my friends, okay, what's in your guidebook? And I think that was really insightful and allowed an opening for me to share some of my needs in a less scary context. I really enjoyed this book, and I'm ready to move on to the next one. Hello, it's been a while since I've updated you, but I have finished another book, and that was The Neuroscience of Self-Love, which is a really short book, and I'm giving it 3 stars. There were some things that I liked about it. I like the really scientific approach, talking about the chemicals in your brain that lead to happiness and good feelings and stuff, but I did feel like this was lacking quite a bit. I'm perfectly aware that things like exercise are good for your brain, and things like doom scrolling are bad for your brain. And this, I can't say, gave me a whole lot more than that. I do think the number one thing I really started reflecting on after finishing this book was dopamine, and the role of dopamine in how we start our days, and burnout and lack of motivation and all of those things, and that has been very useful to think about. And I can't lie, I have used some things that it talked about in here. For example, it did talk about the fact that listening to music is really great for emitting endorphins in your brain. I didn't know that before. I already knew that I listened to music when I didn't feel great to try and feel better, but now I know some of the science behind it and can be proactive and be like, I need some more endorphins today, I'm gonna listen to some music. So there was some value in reading it, but just not enough value for me. And I also can't say that this truly made me think about self-love. The Neuroscience of Self-Love is such a good title, but this was just neuroscience about happy chemicals, which is totally fine, but I feel like marketing it as about self-love is incorrect, at least in the way that the author addressed it. But I'm glad I gave it a go. I'm glad I learned some things, got to think about other things. I'm glad I've applied some of my knowledge to life, but just middle of the road for me, to be perfectly honest with you. So on to the next one. The next book I read for this had a great title, and I thought it would be great. It was The Self-Love Experiment, but I'm giving it 2.5 stars. This book is marketed as a book about one person's journey to finding self-love, and also what she learned along the way so that you can learn those things too. Great in theory. And the idea of a self-love experiment, incredible to me. The execution, however, was not there. I have two main feelings about this. One, this felt more like a really long Pinterest quote than a book with any type of narrative structure. I feel like the author relied on these feel-good phrases instead of being real. It was like a facade of vulnerability. She would tell you like, and this is how I got over this thing and this thing in my life. She never went into detail, which I can understand wanting to do for privacy's sake, about her own struggles, but it made it very surface level. And when she talked about learning to love herself, we didn't really get to see what the journey was truly like for her. We saw some of the big aha moments for her. We saw some of her struggles, but I never felt like I was aware of what her journey actually looked like or felt like. And I think one of the things about learning to love yourself is that it's a vulnerable, difficult, messy process. And when you're not getting vulnerability from this person trying to tell you how to do that process, something's wrong. It just felt like she wasn't being real with me. Again, I'm going back to the idea of like a facade of vulnerability. She said things that on the outside look like she's about to say something deep and meaningful, but at the end of the day, like there is just a lack of substance and a lack of tangible anecdotes and experiences and thoughts. There were a lot of quotes that I highlighted, but again, those are quotes that you could like read and nod to instead of being like, oh, I see how this applies to my life, if that makes any sense. So I just feel like they had like a marketing idea for what marketing this book would look like, and it matched none of what actually turned out to be in the book, really, which is unfortunate because again, I think the idea of an experiment where you're trying to learn to love yourself is brilliant, but that didn't feel like what this book was actually about. She kept referencing her self-love experiment, but we didn't know any parameters of that experiment. We didn't really know things that happened during that experiment. Like, we just lacked so much depth in this, and that was unfortunate. Yeah, the 2.5 stars are for the good quotes, but this isn't what I wanted. Moving on. The next book I read for this is Stumbling on Happiness by Daniel Gilbert, and I chose this book for a very specific reason. One of the classes that I'm taking this semester is a seminar on social psychology, and on the very first day of the class, my professor recommended this specific book. He said it's the best book that he's ever read. He just thinks it's so well written and so good. So obviously when I realized that my library had it, I was like, listen, the theme of happiness, a great book. This seems like a good match for my New Year's Same Me video, so I decided to pick it up. And in the end, I'm giving it 4 stars. I do think it had the potential to be higher than 4 stars, and in some ways, I think my teacher actually ruined this book for me. The reason I say that is because as I was reading it, I was like, gosh, this feels so repetitive, because it turns out that my professor uses almost every example from this book when he's explaining social psychological concepts in class. So a lot of the things that would have been moments that had me go like, oh my gosh, that's so cool or interesting, were things I'd already heard in that exact way before. But I do overall think it's a really well written piece of work. Here's a warning. This book is not technically a self-help book. In fact, in the introduction, the author says, you know, if you're looking for a self-help book, go to a different aisle. This isn't it. It's a general psychology book, largely, I would say, a social cognition book that basically breaks down the reasons why humans are bad at anticipating what will make them happy. I still think this is really helpful in my journey of New Year Same Me, because being aware of these psychological processes and how we can override them is, I think, helpful. He does make the point at the end of the book when he tells us the real solution to these things, that the problem with the solution is that it's very hard and almost no one will actually apply it. But that doesn't mean that it's not useful to know, I think, and I am interested to see going forward how and if I will apply the concept. To save you some reading, the basic concept that he comes up with is that we best estimate how something will make us feel based on reports from people who are experiencing that thing right now. We're bad at remembering how things actually made us feel, and we're bad at predicting how things actually made us feel. And so inquiring with ourselves or others about how something will make us feel will lead us to make decisions that are just incorrect. And this leads us to do things that don't make us happy. So if you want to know if something's truly going to make you happy, you have to check on the happiness of people who are experiencing that thing right now in this moment. If you are interested in social cognition at all or general psychological principles, I do highly recommend this book. It's really well written. And kind of related to this, we read a paper by this author in our class, and that paper was, I forget the title, but the basic idea was that money can buy happiness, you're just spending it incorrectly. And so it was these principles based on empirical research that shows here's how to spend money to make yourself happy, or in ways that lead you to be happier. And that I feel like is maybe more directly applicable than the contents of this book. But regardless, both of them together give me this really great picture of how our brains kind of get in our way by telling us that things will make us happy when they won't. And in some ways, the process of growth is realizing that your brain is messing you up and holding you back. And so I do think this is a valuable book for me to have read. The last book I read for this was by far my favorite of the whole video, Daring Greatly by Brené Brown, and I gave it 5 stars. Brené Brown is a psychologist, and all of her work revolves around vulnerability and wholeheartedness and shame and all of those types of topics. And so this book was her sharing, like, here's what I have found about living a good life based on like vulnerability and shame and all those things from all of my research. And it was just so good and came into my life at just the right time. This is a challenging book, not because it's hard to read, but because it's hard to live. And yet I feel like when you try to live it, you see a huge difference in how life is and how life feels. The basic idea is that being vulnerable is good and we're terrible at it. And we do all of these things to put on this facade of vulnerability and we don't show up as ourselves, and that's harmful. And that makes life less good. I think the thing that hit me the most was her discussion on the barriers to vulnerability, the things that we do to try and look like we're vulnerable when we're not. The biggest one that I resonate with is the idea of perfectionism as a defense against vulnerability, because the whole idea behind perfectionism is like, I cannot fail, I cannot mess up, it has to be exactly right. But failures and mess ups, those are vulnerable, real things. If you are not ever failing, you're not being real about the situation. Since I started reading this book, I already can pinpoint different ways in my life that I have started using the ways that she thinks about these topics to impact my life. For instance, asking myself, why do I feel shame about this thing? Where did I learn this shame? What's keeping me from being vulnerable in this moment? Can I take the risk and be vulnerable to give people other room to live vulnerably? And that's really, really, really hard. It's not easy to show up as yourself when the world has taught you that you are not enough. And the world has taught all of us that in some way. In some area of our lives, we feel like we're not enough. And the feeling of being not enough is shame. That's how she defines shame, is this feeling of not being enough. But you are enough, just as you are. Like, you're a person and that's enough. You're alive and here and that's enough. You're enough. You cannot let the fear of not being enough keep you from living. That's not real living. And you need to challenge yourself constantly to show up in these ways. And I also love the chapter that talked about like vulnerability in academics and how the system has messed us up there. Even as a person who is not a parent, I appreciated the chapter about parenting, as I think she made such great points about how we teach the generation coming after us to live well. How do we set an example? And she makes the great point that like, people will not learn to do this thing from you if you're not actually doing it. People can tell that you're not living what you're saying. And that's not just true with kids, it's true for everyone. If you have a message about self-care and work-life balance and you don't actually try your hardest to live that out, then people don't believe you when you tell them it's okay to take breaks, because they see that you act differently than what you say. So I just loved everything about this book. It was such a good read. I highlighted so many quotes. It's definitely the book in this video that is making the biggest impact on my life so far and will moving forward as well. I think everybody should read it. I just think everybody should. It's based in science, but it's not like wading through scientific stuff. It's just real and raw and human. And a lot of her work is also qualitative work where she sits down and she talks to people and she listens to them and she finds themes from that. I just think her work is so important and I think she does it so well. And I think this book is a really great mechanism in which she captured a lot of what she's learned and shared it with everybody who reads it. So 10 out of 10 recommend. Absolutely great. With that said, it's now April 1st. In no way is it the new year anymore. So same year and same me. And yet it's crazy because I feel like even though things like resolutions are hard and things that we often don't stick with, that doesn't mean we're stagnant always. We are always changing. The me that is finishing this video is a different me than the one who started it. Not just because of the time that has passed, not just because of the experiences I've had for the past couple months, but genuinely because of things like the books that I read and the books that I read for this video. This information changes the way that you think and the ways that you see the world. And coming in asking myself, how can I grow right now? It doesn't matter if it's January 1st or April 1st or March 23rd. There is always time to grow and change in beautiful ways. And I think that's the challenge to ourselves, is to just keep moving forward, however that looks for us. I want to thank you for coming on this journey with me to try and learn things about myself and how I can be more content with the life that I have. It's a beautiful life. It's a messy life, but it's beautiful. And I'm so glad that you're part of it. So if you like this video, go ahead and give it a big thumbs up and comment down below a little brain emoji, because I sure did learn a lot making this video, and subscribe for more bookish and college lifestyle content. And until next time, bye humans, bye!